Blood shouldn't look this dark against white marble. That was the only coherent thought left in the ballroom as silence descended, a suffocating, heavy silence that choked the breath out of 300 high-ranking dignitaries gathered at Many Glacier Hotel in the heart of Montana's wilderness. One moment the music was playing, violins echoing off timber beams that had stood for nearly a century, crystal chandeliers swaying gently above heads adorned with diamonds and authority. The next moment, a tray of champagne flutes shattered, spraying expensive French vintage across polished stone, and a girl nobody thought worthy of a second glance was convulsing on the ground, black blood bubbling at her lips like some cursed spring. But the terror didn't truly start until the lodge doors exploded inward. It wasn't the sight of the dying girl that made the room freeze. It wasn't the blood that hissed and steamed where it touched the floor, eating into the stone like acid. It was seeing Caspian Ashford, the Winter King, the man who hadn't shown an emotion in a decade, the alpha who had personally executed 3,800 wolves in the Red Moon Uprising, sprint across the room with inhuman speed and drop to his knees in shattered glass, his roar of agony so pure it cracked the antique windows overlooking Swift Current Lake. The Continental Alpha Summit was held each autumn at Many Glacier Hotel, a sprawling lodge nestled in Glacier National Park, Montana. Built in 1915, the hotel was all dark timber and stone with mounted elk heads watching from walls and fireplaces large enough to roast a deer. It sat at the edge of wilderness so vast and untamed that humans rarely ventured beyond the marked trails. For the wolf packs of North America, it was sacred ground, neutral territory, a place where the most powerful alphas could gather without fear of ambush or political maneuvering. Or so they thought. For Marlo Thorne, Many Glacier wasn't sanctuary. It was just another cage with prettier bars. She adjusted the collar of her stiff black uniform as she stood in the service corridor, waiting for her cue to enter the ballroom. The fabric was rough against her skin, 2 sizes too large a hand-me-down from the last Omega servant who had collapsed from exhaustion and never woken up. At 22 years old, Marlo should have been radiant. She should have shifted into her wolf form 4 years ago at 18, like every other werewolf in recorded history. She should have had a scent that drew potential mates, a presence that commanded respect, a future that held something more than servitude. Instead, she was the null, the ghost, the thing. She had no wolf, no scent beyond the smell of industrial soap and fear sweat. And according to Alpha Thaddeus Blackwell, who had graciously taken her in after her parents died 12 years ago, she had no future except the one he carved for her with a silver and cruelty. Thorne stopped staring at nothing and get moving. The voice came from behind her, nasal and sharp. Marlo flinched, nearly dropping the heavy silver tray balanced on her left hand. Her right hand instinctively went to her ribs where bruises from 2 days ago still throbbed with every breath. Overseer Finch loomed over her, his potbelly straining against his cheap suit vest. He smelled like stale coffee and the particular breed of cruelty that came from having just enough power to hurt those weaker than himself. "I'm going as fast as I can, sir," Marlo whispered, keeping her eyes on the polished floor. Eye contact was disrespect. Disrespect meant punishment. She'd learned that lesson at age 11 when Seraphine Blackwell had held her hand over a candle flame for daring to look directly at her. "Faster," Finch spat close enough that flecks of his saliva landed on her cheek. She didn't dare wipe them away. "Tonight is the Continental Summit. The Winter King himself is attending. If there is a single smudge on a single glass, if you so much as breathe wrong in front of these alphas, I will personally drag you to the loading dock and leave you for the rogues. Understand?" Marlo nodded, fighting the wave of dizziness that washed over her. It had started 3 weeks ago, a dull, persistent ache deep in the marrow of her bones, like her skeleton was trying to crack itself apart from the inside. It felt like her blood was too hot for her, veins bubbling and churning like water about to boil over. She had hidden it, of course. In the Blackwell pack, weakness wasn't just shameful. It was a death sentence. If Alpha Thaddeus knew she was sick, he wouldn't waste money on a doctor. He'd put her down like a lame horse and write it off as pest control in his expense ledger. She picked up the fresh tray of champagne flutes, her hands trembling despite her best efforts to steady them. The tremors were getting worse. 2 weeks ago, it had just been a slight shake in her fingers. Now her whole arm quivered like a plucked string, making the crystal glasses clink softly against each other. "You look like Death Ghost." Marlo didn't need to turn around to know who had spoken. That voice had haunted her nightmares for 8 years, ever since the day she'd been stupid enough, naive enough, broken enough to think that maybe, just maybe, someone in the Blackwell pack might see her as more than a possession. Colton Blackwell stepped into her line of sight, all sandy blonde hair and a smile sharp enough to draw blood. At 24, he was everything an alpha's son should be, tall, handsome, radiating casual power in his expensive tuxedo. He'd shifted at 18 right on schedule into a wolf the color of summer wheat. Marlowe had been there that day, 16 years old and still stubbornly, pathetically hopeful that her own wolf would emerge any moment. It never had, and Colton had laughed in her face when she'd stayed human while everyone else celebrated their transformations beneath the full moon. "I'm fine, Colton," she murmured, attempting to step around him. The ballroom doors were only 20 feet away. If she could just get through them, disappear into the crowd of dignitaries with her tray and her invisible existence, maybe she could survive this night. But Colton moved to block her path, his smile widening. Up close, she could see the faint flush in his cheeks. He'd been drinking already, which meant he was bored and looking for entertainment. In the Blackwell pack, entertainment usually meant tormenting the null girl. "You know what I heard?" Colton said, leaning down so his breath stirred the strands of brown hair that had escaped from her tight bun. "I heard the Winter King is coming tonight specifically to choose someone. Not a mate he's too cold for that, too broken by the war. Just someone to carry an heir. A breeder." He circled her slowly like a cat toying with a mouse. "They say he's been searching for years, but no one's good enough. Every Luna in North America has thrown herself at him, and he's rejected them all. Some say his wolf is too damaged to form a mate bond. Some say he's just too dead inside to feel anything anymore." Colton stopped in front of her, his nose wrinkling in theatrical disgust. "Too bad you smell like dishwater and bleach. You're invisible, Marlowe. You'll always be invisible. Even to someone as desperate as the Winter King." He shoved her shoulder as he walked past, not hard but enough. In her weakened state, already fighting to keep the tray steady, already battling the dizziness and bone-deep ache, Marlowe stumbled. Her hip caught the edge of a service table. The tray tilted. She caught it at the last second, preventing a cascade of breaking glass that would have earned her a beating, but the movement sent a sharp, white-hot pain shooting through her chest. It felt like someone had driven a railroad spike directly through her sternum. Thump, thump, thump. The sound of her own heartbeat was suddenly deafening, drowning out the distant music from the ballroom. Her vision swam with red and black spots. Heat rolled through her body in waves, each one more intense than the last, until she felt like she was standing in a furnace. "Not now. Please, not now. Just get through the night. Just serve the drinks. Just disappear." She forced herself upright, gripping the table until her knuckles went white. Sweat beaded on her forehead despite the cool mountain air drifting through the corridor. She wiped it away with a shaking hand and grabbed the tray again. The doors to the grand ballroom were opening. The summit was beginning. She had a job to do. If she failed, death would be a mercy compared to what the Blackwells would do to her. The ballroom was a sea of power dressed in velvet and silk. The air was thick with competing scents, pine and musk and cedar and rain and smoke and earth. It was an intoxicating, aggressive mix of pheromones designed to dominate, to assert, to claim space and status. For a human, it would have been overwhelming. For Marlowe, a wolf without a wolf, it was nauseating. She moved through the crowd like a shadow offering champagne to wolves who looked through her as if she were furniture. She kept her head down, her movements small and efficient. Invisibility was safety. Silence was survival. The ballroom itself was magnificent, even she had to admit. Massive timber beams crossed the ceiling, each one a whole tree trunk, stripped and polished. 3 stone fireplaces roared with flames, casting dancing shadows across walls decorated with Native American tapestries and old photographs of the park. Floor-to-ceiling windows offered views of Swift Current Lake and the jagged peaks beyond their snowcaps glowing pink in the dying light. But Marlowe barely saw the beauty. She was counting steps, monitoring her breathing, fighting to stay upright as the pain in her chest intensified with each passing minute. "Ladies and gentlemen," the announcer's voice boomed across the ballroom, amplified by alpha power, until it rattled the chandeliers. "Distinguished alphas of the Continental Packs, it is my honor to present His Majesty Caspian Ashford, the Winter King." The double doors at the far end of the hall didn't just open. They seemed to retreat in deference, like even inanimate objects recognized the presence entering the room. And then he was there. Marlowe had seen pictures of King Caspian in newspapers and online forums where wolves discussed politics and power. She'd heard the stories, the legends, the whispered tales of the man who had ended the Red Moon uprising single-handedly, who had executed nearly 4,000 wolves in the span of 3 months, who ruled the North American packs with an iron fist wrapped in winter frost. But photographs did no justice to the reality. Caspian Ashford was massive, standing well over 6.5 feet tall, with shoulders that strained the fabric of his perfectly tailored gray suit. His hair was black with silver, threaded through the temples, swept back from a face that looked like it had been carved from granite and ice. Sharp cheekbones, a jaw that could cut glass, a mouth that seemed like it had forgotten how to smile. But it was his eyes that made 300 powerful wolves instinctively lower their gazes. They were the color of winter lakes, frozen solid pale, almost white, ancient and cold. And they were utterly, completely dead, empty as a grave. Cold as permafrost, he moved with the fluid grace of a predator who had never once questioned his place at the top of the food chain, flanked by his beta, a tactical genius named Elias Thorne, whose reputation for strategic brutality was known across the continent, and his head of security, a woman named Ravenna Cross, whose scars told stories of battles won through sheer viciousness. The room bowed, literally bowed. Every alpha, every Luna, every dignitary, and council member dipped their heads in submission to the king who had unified the North American Pax through blood and terror. Marlowe, standing near a timber pillar in the back of the room, felt the searing pain in her chest spike again. This time it drove her to one knee behind the pillars, hidden from most of the crowd. The tray in her hand rattled glasses chiming against each other. She bit her lips so hard she tasted copper, forcing herself to breathe through the agony. Do not make a scene. Do not draw attention. Do not exist. But the pain was building, now building and building like pressure in a sealed container. Her skin felt too tight, like something was trying to claw its way out of her from the inside. The heat in her blood intensified until she could swear she felt steam rising from her pores. King Caspian was moving through the crowd, now shaking hands without really looking at people. His expression bored and dangerous all at once. He looked like a man who was attending out of obligation, not interest, like a predator forced to dine with prey and pretend he didn't notice how good they smelled. He was making a direct line for the head table, which would take him right past the pillar where Marlowe was trying desperately to stay conscious, stay quiet, stay invisible. As he got closer, 50 feet, 40 feet, 30 feet, the heat in Marlowe's blood became unbearable. It wasn't just a fever anymore. It felt like her veins were filled with molten metal, like every cell in her body was burning and dying and being reborn all at once. 20 feet. She tasted blood, realized she'd bitten through her lip. 10 feet. Her vision started to tunnel, darkness creeping in from the edges. And then Caspian Ashford stopped. He froze mid-step, one foot in the air, his entire body going rigid as if he'd been struck by lightning. His head snapped up, nostrils flaring. The board mask shattered, replaced by something wild and confused and desperate. The entire ballroom went quiet, 300 wolves watching their king with growing alarm. "My lord," Elias Thorne whispered, stepping closer. "What is it?" Caspian ignored him. The Winter King turned slowly, those ice-blue eyes scanning the periphery of the room with predatory focus. His hands were clenched at his sides, trembling visibly. A low growl started in his chest, a sound so deep and resonant it rattled the silverware on the tables and made several nearby wolves whimper with instinctive fear. Marlowe couldn't breathe. The pain was blinding now, a white-hot agony that filled her entire body. She tried to take a step backward to hide more completely behind the pillar, to disappear into the shadows where she belonged, but her legs gave out. "No, please, not here, not now." She collapsed. The tray hit the marble floor, first crystal shattering in an explosion of glass and champagne that seemed to echo in the sudden silence. Then Marlowe hit the floor with a sickening thud that she felt more than heard her skull cracking against the stone. Every eye in the room turned to the clumsy servant who had dared to disrupt the evening. Alpha Thaddeus Blackwell was there in a second, his face purple with rage, barely contained. He grabbed her arm, his fingers digging in hard enough to bruise. "You stupid girl," he hissed, trying to haul her upright. Get up right now. You're embarrassing this pack in front of the king." Marlowe tried, she really truly tried. But when she opened her mouth to apologize, to beg forgiveness, to promise she'd clean up the mess and disappear forever, a torrent of blood erupted from her lips, not the bright red of a normal injury. This blood was dark, almost black, with an iridescent sheen like oil. And where it splattered onto the white marble, it hissed and steamed and ate into the stone like acid. Someone screamed, "She's sick, plague." Another voice, high with panic, "Demon, she's been cursed." Marlowe convulsed her back, arching off the floor as waves of pain rolled through her. She could feel something inside her breaking, shattering like invisible chains, snapping one by one. Alpha Thaddeus dropped her arm as if she'd burned him, wiping his hand on his expensive slacks. "Get her out of here," he commanded the nearest guards. "Drag her to the loading dock and leave her. I won't have this thing contaminating my pack." Two guards moved forward, reaching for her ankles. "Stop." The word wasn't shouted, it wasn't even particularly loud, but it carried more weight than a scream, more authority than a command. It was the voice of someone who had never once been disobeyed and could not conceive of disobedience as a possibility. King Caspian Ashford was moving. He wasn't walking anymore. He was hunting, his body low and predatory, his eyes fixed on the girl bleeding on his ballroom floor with an intensity that made seasoned warriors step back in fear. He shoved Alpha Thaddeus aside with enough force to send the man flying into a table of hors d'oeuvres. The guards who had been reaching for Marlowe dropped her legs and scrambled backwards so fast they crashed into each other. Marlowe was drowning in her own blood, choking on it, her vision fading to gray static. She lay on her back, staring up at the chandelier, watching the light blur and double and fade. She felt heavy footsteps approaching through the floor, felt the vibration of something large and dangerous getting closer. She expected a killing blow, expected the king to finish what her body had started to put her out of her misery like the animal everyone said she was. Instead, a shadow fell over her, blocking out the chandelier's light. And then Caspian Ashford, the Winter King, the man who had not shown emotion in 10 years, dropped to his knees. He didn't care about the glass slicing through his expensive suit pants, didn't care about the blood soaking into the fabric, didn't care that 300 powerful wolves were watching him shatter. He reached out with large calloused hands, hovering them over Marlowe's face. His hands were shaking, actually shaking, trembling like leaves in a storm. Mine. The word came out broken, strangled, full of such raw despair and desperate recognition that it confused everyone listening. The Winter King's winter pale eyes were no longer dead and empty. They were swirling with chaos, panic, and recognition, and something that looked almost like joy mixed with terror. Marlowe blinked up at him through the blood and the pain, found his eyes, held them. In her fading consciousness, one thought surfaced with crystal clarity. He's beautiful. Help me, she whispered, the words bubbling past the blood on her lips, and Caspian Ashford roared. It was a sound of pure, unadulterated devastation. The sound of something precious found and immediately threatened. The sound of a heart that had been frozen solid for a decade suddenly cracking apart. He scooped her up into his arms, pulling her ruined, blood-soaked body against his pristine white shirt. Blood immediately soaked through the expensive fabric, but he didn't seem to notice or care. Get a healer, he bellowed, his voice cracking on the words. Get every healer in Montana. If she die, his voice broke completely. If she dies, I will burn this entire territory to bedrock. Do you understand me? I will end Montana. He looked down at Marlowe, and for the first time in recorded history, the Winter King was crying. A single tear tracked through the blood on his cheek, followed by another and another. I found you, he whispered into her hair, rocking back and forth like a parent soothing a child. I finally found you after all these years. Don't you dare leave me now. Stay with me, little wolf. Stay. But Marlowe couldn't stay. The fire inside her had consumed the last reserves of her strength, burning through whatever invisible barrier had been holding her together all these years. Her head lolled back against his arm, her eyes rolling up to show only whites. The last thing she felt before darkness claimed her was the strange electric sparking where his skin touched hers, and the terrifying, impossible realization that the most powerful alpha in North America was trembling like a leaf in a hurricane. The last thing she heard was his voice, cracked and desperate, and so very human. Don't leave me, please, I just found you. And then there was nothing but darkness and the distant sound of the Winter King screaming her name to a room full of wolves who had never seen him feel anything at all. When Marlowe woke, she wasn't dead. That was the first surprise. The second surprise was that she was lying on a bed that probably cost more than every possession she'd ever owned, combined in a room that smelled like pine forest after rain, and something else, something darker and colder, like winter frost and distant smoke. The sheets were silk cool against her fever-damaged skin. The mattress cradled her body instead of bruising it. For the first moment of consciousness before memory crashed back, Marlowe thought she might actually be dead, and this was some kind of afterlife her broken mind had constructed. Then pain bloomed across her ribs and chest, sharp and immediate, and she knew with certainty that the dead didn't hurt. She tried to sit up, but a gentle hand pressed against her shoulder, keeping her down. Easy now. You've been through considerable trauma. The voice was male, older, with the kind of calm authority that came from decades of being listened to. Your body needs rest, not heroics. Marlowe turned her head, vision swimming slightly. An older man sat in a leather chair beside the bed, silver hair gleaming in the low lamplight. He wore a white coat over expensive clothes, and his eyes, dark brown and kind, studied her with the focus of someone who saw puzzles in everything. I am Dr. Sylvanus Crane, he said, setting down the medical tablet he'd been reading. You're in the medical wing of Obsidian Ridge, the King's private compound in Seattle, Washington. You've been unconscious for 3 days. 3 days, Marlowe's mind reeled. The summit, the blood, the pain, and him, the Winter King, on his knees crying, calling her his. Why am I here? Her voice came out as a rasped throat raw from whatever she'd been coughing up. I'm just a servant. I ruined the summit. I should be, she didn't finish the sentence. Should be dead. Should be discarded. Should be forgotten. Dr. Crane's expression shifted, something like sympathy crossing his features. You are most certainly not just his servant. And as for why you're here, he glanced toward the door, then back to her. The king hasn't left that hallway in 3 days. He's been standing guard outside your room since we transported you from Montana. Elias had to threaten him with sedation to get him to sit down for a few hours. Marlowe stared at him, unable to process the words. The Winter King, standing guard, over her. I don't understand. No, I don't imagine you do. Dr. Crane stood moving to check the monitors beside her bed. Tell me, Marlowe, do you know anything about your parents, your lineage? The question hit like a physical blow. Marlowe's hand instinctively went to the small scar on her collarbone, the only mark she had that might have come from before the fire that killed her parents, before Alpha Thaddeus claimed her as a ward of his pack, before 12 years of systematic erasure of everything she'd been. My parents died when I was 10. Rogue attack, they said. Alpha Thaddeus took me in. She nearly choked on the words. Took me in. What a gentle phrase for what had actually happened. I don't have a lineage. I'm a null. I have nothing. Dr. Crane was quiet for a long moment, his fingers steepled under his chin. When he finally spoke, his voice was grave. You are not a null, Marlowe. You are an alpha. The laugh that escaped her was dry and painful, scraping against her damaged throat. That's impossible. I've never shifted. I can't even command a puppy, let alone a pack. You couldn't shift because you were sealed, Doctor. Crane picked up his tablet, turning it to show her a complex chart of blood analysis that meant nothing to her untrained eyes. But she could see the way certain markers pulsed red, could see the notation at the bottom that said the anomalous magic residue detected. Someone performed a blood seal on you when you were an infant. He continued, his voice dropping to barely above a whisper. It's ancient, forbidden magic. The kind that requires a sacrifice and knowledge that most modern wolves don't possess. A blood seal binds a wolf's spirit so deep inside the human host that it can never surface. It essentially creates an artificial null. He leaned forward, his eyes intense. It's usually done for one reason only: to hide someone, to make them invisible, unremarkable, forgotten, to protect them or imprison them, depending on who cast it. Marlowe's mind was spinning, trying to grasp what he was telling her. But if I was sealed, why did it break now? Why at the summit? Because the mate bond is the only force on Earth stronger than a blood seal. The words hung in the air like a guillotine blade about to fall. When King Caspian walked into that ballroom, your wolf recognized him. It had been trapped for 22 years, Marlowe. Imagine being buried alive in the dark, clawing at walls that never break. Then suddenly you hear the one voice in all the world that makes you feel safe. Your wolf didn't just try to reach him. It tore through centuries-old magic to get to him. It nearly killed you in the process. Marlowe lay back against the pillows, the room spinning around her. The mate bond, the Winter King, her. That's why the blood was black, Dr. Crane continued softly. That's why it burned the floor. You weren't bleeding, you were breaking. Every drop was infused with the magic that had been containing you, forced out as your wolf shattered its cage. Before Marlowe could respond, before she could even begin to process the enormity of what she was being told, the heavy oak door creaked open. The air in the room changed instantly, became heavier, charged with static electricity that made her skin prickle. The temperature seemed to drop several degrees. Dr. Crane stood quickly, gathering his tablet. I'll give you privacy, Your Majesty. He bowed his head and slipped past the figure in the doorway, closing the door with a soft click that sounded like a gunshot in the sudden silence. Caspian Ashford stood in the doorway, and Marlowe's breath caught in her throat. He looked nothing like the polished king from the ballroom. His white shirt was wrinkled and stained with her blood, she realized with a jolt. The top 3 buttons were undone, revealing the hollow of his throat and the edge of what looked like old scars. He had dark circles under his eyes like bruises, and stubble shadowed his jaw. His black and silver hair was uncombed, falling across his forehead. He looked exhausted. He looked dwindled. He looked like a man who had been standing vigil at death's door for 3 days straight. And his eyes, those frost-colored eyes that had been so dead in the ballroom, were burning now with an intensity that made her want to look away and hold his gaze forever all at once. Marlowe? Her name on his lips was rough, gravelly, like he hadn't spoken in days. Like her name was a word in a language he was just learning. She pulled the silk sheet up to her chin, suddenly aware that she was wearing a hospital gown, that her hair was probably a disaster, that she looked like death warmed over. Your Majesty. He winced like she'd struck him. Don't. He took a step forward, then stopped abruptly, as if physically restraining himself from moving closer. His hands clenched at his sides, and she could see them trembling. The Winter King, who ruled through strength and terror, was shaking. Don't call me that, he said, his voice barely above a whisper. Not you. What should I call you then? Her own voice was trembling now, too. You're the king and I'm... She stopped, not even sure how to finish that sentence anymore. What was she? I don't even know what I am. You are my life. The words were simple, absolute, spoken with such raw honesty that they stole the breath from her lungs. He crossed the room in 2 long strides, all that careful restraint breaking. He dropped into the chair Dr. Crane had vacated, leaning forward, embracing his elbows on his knees. His face was suddenly inches from hers, and she could see details she'd missed before: the flecks of amber hidden in the ice blue of his eyes, the thin white scar cutting through his left eyebrow, the way his jaw was clenched so tight the muscle jumped, and she could see the terror. Raw and unmasked. Terror that she was real, that she was fragile, that she could disappear. Does it hurt? He asked, his eyes scanning her face, her shoulders searching for visible injuries. A little, she admitted. No point in lying, he'd know. His expression darkened immediately, a muscle in his jaw ticking. When he spoke again, his voice was rough, with barely contained violence. Tell me their names, everyone who hurt you. I want their names. Marlowe blinked, confused. What? The Blackwells, the ones who kept you as a slave, who starved you and beat you and poisoned you for 12 years. His hands were fisting in his own hair now, like he needed to hold on to something to keep from tearing the room apart. Dr. Crane showed me the scars on your back, the burns, the marks from the silver trap on your leg. I want to know who did that to you so I can personally rip them apart. The cold fury in his voice should have terrified her. Instead, something warm unfurled in her chest. When was the last time someone had been angry on her behalf? When was the last time anyone had cared that she was hurt? It doesn't matter now, she said softly. It matters to me. Silence fell between them, heavy with things unsaid. Finally, Marlowe gathered her courage. Dr. Crane said something. About my blood. About what I am. Caspian's expression shifted, the fury banking into something more controlled, but no less intense. You're an alpha, but not just any alpha. He paused, seeming to struggle with the words. The blood that runs in your veins is rare. It's called the Moonscar bloodline. Marlowe's eyes widened. She knew that name. Every wolf in North America knew that name. But they were traitors, she whispered. The history books say they tried to overthrow the crown during the Red Moon Uprising. They were all, she stopped, the implications hitting her. They were all supposed to be dead. History is written by the victors, Caspian said, his voice bitter. And my father was the victor. He led the charge against the Moonscar wolves 20 years ago, claimed they were planning a coup, that they were too powerful, too dangerous to be allowed to exist. He laughed, but there was no humor in it. He hunted them down systematically, executed them in public squares, burned their homes, killed their children. 3,800 wolves dead in 3 months. He looked at her and she saw old pain in his eyes, pain and guilt and rage that had nowhere to go. I was 15 when it started, too young to understand the politics, too weak to stop it. By the time it ended, I'd lost, his voice cracked. I'd lost someone important to me, someone I tried to save. Marlowe remembered what Dr. Crane had said. The king stood guard for 3 days, never left, never slept. Like he was afraid she'd disappear if he looked away. The Moonscar wolves were supposed to be extinct, Caspian continued. Or so we thought, but here you are. He reached out slowly, telegraphing his movement, and took her hand in his. His skin was scorching hot, but it didn't burn. Instead, it felt like coming home. Like something in her that had been cold for 22 years was finally warming. A purr rumbled in his chest, an involuntary sound of contentment that alphas made when near their mates. And for the first time in her life, the empty, aching hole in Marlowe's chest felt filled. If the council finds out you have Moonscar blood, Caspian said, his thumb stroking across her knuckles, they will demand your execution. The law passed after the uprising is absolute. No Moonscar wolf is allowed to live. No exceptions. Marlowe yanked her hand back, panic seizing her chest. So you're going to kill me, is that it? You saved me just to... No. The word was a snarl, feral and fierce. He stood abruptly, the chair scraping backward. I would burn this entire continent to ash before I let them touch you. He began to pace, moving like a caged predator. The room suddenly felt smaller with him prowling through it. But you don't understand, I'm the king, yes. But the council holds the power of the law. If I claim you publicly as my mate right now, they'll investigate your lineage. They have seers, blood, mages, wolves who can trace heritage back centuries. They will find the truth, and then they will try to take you from me. He stopped, turning to face her. His eyes were blazing with cold fire. We have to lie, create a false identity. You can't be Marlowe Thorne, the null servant from the Blackwell pack. We'll say you're a distant relative of an exiled European family. We'll construct a history, forge documents, create witnesses. His jaw clenched. We need to train you, teach you to move like an alpha, speak like nobility, command like a queen. Before they tear you apart, we make you untouchable. I can't be a queen, Marlowe said, her voice rising with panic. I drop plates. I trip over my own feet. Yesterday I was scrubbing floors. How am I supposed to? Caspian was back at her bedside in an instant, his hands cupping her face with surprising gentleness for someone so lethal. His touch made her breath catch, made her skin tingle with that electric current. You are not a servant, he said, his voice low and intense. You are a queen who has been sleeping, a wolf who was bound and caged and silenced. My job, our job, is to wake you up, to teach you what you already are inside. His forehead nearly touched hers, his penetrating gaze holding her captive. I don't need you to be perfect, Marlowe. I need you to be alive. Everything else we'll figure out together. His lips brushed against her forehead, feather light, and the contact sent a jolt of electricity straight down her spine that made her gasp. It felt like every nerve ending in her body had suddenly woken up, like she'd been living in muted grayscale, and suddenly someone had turned on the color. Caspian pulled back, his pupils dilated, his breathing slightly unsteady. He'd felt it too. Rest now, he commanded softly, though his voice was rougher than before. Tomorrow the wolves will come investigating, and among them will be the people who put that seal on you in the first place. We need to find them before they finish what they started. He turned to leave, and panic flared in Marlowe's chest. Wait, Caspian. He stopped, his hand on the doorframe. He didn't turn around, but she saw his shoulders relax slightly at the sound of his name. His actual name, not his title. Why me? She asked. The question that had been burning in her chest since she woke up. Why am I your mate? I'm broken. I'm nothing. Why would fate choose me for you? He looked back then, and the crooked smile that crossed his face was devastating. It transformed him from the cold, terrifying Winter King into something achingly human. We're all broken, Marlowe, he said quietly. That's how the light gets in. And then he was gone, the door clicking shut behind him, leaving her alone with silk sheets and the lingering scent of winter frost and pine, and the impossible knowledge that the most powerful alpha in North America had just called her his life. Outside in the hallway, Caspian leaned against the wall and let out a shaking breath. His hands were trembling again, adrenaline and relief and terror mixing into a cocktail that left him feeling drunk and unstable. She was alive. She was awake. She was his, and he would kill anyone who tried to take her away. That night, Marlowe couldn't sleep. The medical wing was too quiet, too peaceful after 12 years of sleeping on concrete floors, with one ear always listening for danger. She lay in the silk sheets, staring at the ceiling, her mind replaying everything Dr. Crane had told her. Moonscar, mate bond, blood seal. Words that should have terrified her, but somehow didn't. Maybe because terror required energy, and she'd spent all of hers just surviving. A sound in the hallway made her freeze. Not the measured footsteps of security. Something else. A low growl barely audible. Then labored breathing. She slipped out of bed, bare feet silent on the cool floor, and cracked the door open. Caspian sat on the floor just outside her room, back against the wall, legs drawn up. His dress shirt was unbuttoned and hanging open, revealing a muscled chest marked with old scars. But it was the black veins spreading from his left shoulder that made her breath catch. They looked like frost patterns on a winter window, intricate, almost beautiful, but they pulsed with dark energy. The veins crept toward his heart with each beat, and the skin around them was pale, almost blue-white with cold. His head was tilted back against the wall, eyes closed, jaw clenched so tight she could see the muscle jumping. Sweat beaded on his forehead despite the cool temperature. Caspian. His eyes snapped open, not ice blue now, but flickering silver with pain, and the wool barely leashed beneath his skin. Get back inside. His voice was strained, rough. You shouldn't see this. but Marlowe was already stepping into the hallway, closing the door behind her. She knelt beside him, and up close she could see the veins weren't just black, they shimmered with an oily, iridescent quality. Like oil slicks or raven feathers, the air around them felt cold enough to frost. "What is this frostbite curse?" He bit out the words through clenched teeth. 20 years old. Got it during the uprising. Another wave of pain hit him, his hands fisted knuckles white. Killing a Moonscar elder, she was protecting children. Dying, she reached up and touched my shoulder. Said, "May you feel what we felt. Cold, alone, frozen from the inside." His laugh was bitter, broken. "It spreads when I'm emotional, stressed. When the wolf gets agitated. Right now he stopped shaking his head. You're here, you're real, and he's terrified you'll disappear. Does it always hurt like this?" "Every day since I was 15. He opened his eyes, looking at her. The silver was fading back to ice blue, but she could see the pain etched in every line of his face. "I've learned to hide it, suppress it. Kings don't show weakness. But tonight, after almost losing you after 3 days of standing guard thinking you might die," his voice cracked, "I can't control it anymore." Marlowe didn't think, didn't plan. She just reached out and pressed her palm flat against the black veins where they were thickest, right over his heart. "Don't!" Caspian grabbed her wrist, but not to pull her away, to stop her from pulling away. "It reacts to touch. Burns anyone who—" He stopped, stared. Where her hand touched, the black veins receded, like frost melting under sunlight, like ice touched by flame. The dark energy that had been pulsing toward his heart retreated, dissolving into nothing. The blue-white skin flushed pink with warmth and life. Marlowe gasped. She could feel it, the curse fighting against her touch, ancient magic trying to maintain its grip. But her blood rose to meet it. Her Moonscar heritage recognized the Elder's dying curse and simply consumed it, broke it apart, devoured the magic like it was nothing more than frost in spring. Caspian's grip on her wrist tightened. "How are you doing this?" "I don't know." But she did somehow. Deep in her bones, in the wolf that had been sealed for 22 years, she knew. The Moonscar Elder had been her ancestor, distant but real. The curse recognized her blood and surrendered to it. She moved her hands slowly along the black veins, tracing them from where they clustered thick over his heart, up his shoulder toward the point where they originated. Everywhere her fingers touched, they vanished. The cold fled, the pain retreated. By the time she reached the source, a small mark on his left shoulder blade that looked like a handprint burned into his skin, the black veins were gone completely. Just healthy, warm skin marked with old scars, but no curse. 20 years of agony. Erased. Caspian caught her face in both his hands, and she saw his eyes were swimming with something that looked like disbelief. Like hope. Like a man who'd been carrying a mountain, suddenly finding his shoulders free. "My wolf," he whispered, his voice thick with emotion. "He's quiet. For the first time in 20 years, he's not screaming." "What was he screaming?" Marlowe asked softly. "Pain. Every second. Imagine someone driving ice picks into your bones over and over, never stopping. And rage at my father for starting the war, at myself for not stopping it, at the world for taking everything I loved." His thumbs stroked across her cheekbones, catching tears she didn't realize she'd shed. He screamed, "Kill everyone, because if everyone was dead, maybe the pain would stop. Maybe I could sleep without dreaming of children burning." His voice broke completely. "You just gave me silence. Peace after 20 years of torture, silence. Do you understand what you've given me?" She understood. She saw it in his eyes, the same wonder she'd felt when he'd called her his life, when he'd stood guard outside her door for 3 days, when he'd cried because she might die. Two broken people healing each other in the only way that mattered. He pulled her against his chest, and she went willingly, letting him wrap his arms around her like she was something precious, something that might break. She felt his heart beating steady and strong beneath her cheek. No curse. No pain spreading toward it with every beat. Just life. "Thank you," he whispered into her hair, the words barely audible. "Thank you, Marlowe. You have no idea 20 years I've lived with that. Wondering if it would finally reach my heart. If I'd die like she did, frozen from the inside alone, feeling nothing but cold." "You're not alone," Marlowe said, her arms tightening around him. "Not anymore." They sat like that in the hallway for a long time. A king and a girl who was still learning she was more than a ghost. Healing each other with nothing more than touch and presence, and the understanding that sometimes the most powerful magic was simply being seen. Eventually, Caspian stood, pulling her up with him, But he didn't let her go back to her room alone. He walked her to the door, then hesitated. I should let you rest. You should rest too, Marlowe said, without pain for the first time in 20 years. You should sleep. His crooked smile was devastating. I'm afraid if I sleep, I'll wake up and this will have been a dream. The curse will be back. You'll be gone. I'm not going anywhere. She squeezed his hand, and the curse is gone. I promise. He kissed her forehead, that same feather-light touch that sent electricity down her spine, and finally let her go. But when she closed the door, she heard him settle back down outside it, still standing guard, but this time not in pain, this time at peace. The next morning, Marlowe discovered that being the secret mate of the Winter King came with an entirely new set of terrors, ones that didn't involve silver traps or starvation, but were terrifying nonetheless. Lady Genevieve Whitmore arrived at precisely 8 in the morning, announced by a sharp knock that sounded more like a judgment than a greeting. She swept into the medical wing like a winter storm given human form, all steel gray hair pulled into a severe bun, ramrod posture, and eyes that missed absolutely nothing. So you're the girl who brought the Winter King to his knees, Lady Whitmore said, without preamble, her cane tapping against the polished hardwood floor as she circled the bed where Marlowe sat. You don't look like much. Bit scrawny, terrible posture, and that hair, when was the last time it saw a proper stylist? Marlowe opened her mouth, but no sound came out. 12 years of conditioning screamed at her to apologize, to make herself smaller, to disappear. Well, speak up, girl. If you're going to pass as nobility in 3 days when the council arrives for their investigation, you'll need to find your voice. Queens don't mumble. Marlowe started, then stopped. Queens. The word sat wrong in her mouth, foreign and sharp-edged. Lady Whitmore sighed, a sound like wind through dead branches. We have so much work to do. His Majesty has asked me to transform you from servant to lady in less than a week. I've performed miracles before, but this, she gestured vaguely at Marlowe, this will require divine intervention. Over the next 6 hours, Marlowe learned that divine intervention apparently involved memorizing which fork to use for which course, how to walk without limping, despite the permanent damage to her leg, how to hold a wine glass, how to curtsy without looking like she was collapsing, and how to introduce herself as Lady Ashwood from the Virginia branch of an extinct noble family. No, no, no. Lady Whitmore's cane tapped against Marlowe's spine, not hard but insistent. Shoulders back, chin up. You look like a kicked dog, not a lady of standing. Marlowe straightened, fighting the instinct to hunch, to make herself small, to be invisible. Tap, tap, tap. The cane hit her spine again. When you enter a room, you command it. You don't apologize for your existence. You don't shrink. Alpha blood runs in your veins. Now act like it. I don't know how, Marlowe said, frustration bleeding into her voice. I've spent 12 years being told I'm nothing. I can't just then learn. Lady Whitmore's voice was sharp as breaking ice. Because in 3 days, Councillor Holloway arrives. He lost his wife and 3 children to Moonscar wolves during the uprising. He believes your entire bloodline is demonic. If he suspects what you are, he won't just call for your execution. He'll make it his life's mission to see you burned alive. The cane tapped against her spine again, harder this time. Something hot coiled in Marlowe's gut, a sensation like the one in the ballroom right before she collapsed. But different now. More focused, more controlled. Stop it, Marlowe said quietly. Make me. Lady Whitmore's lips curved into a cold smile, and she prodded harder with the cane right between Marlowe's shoulder blades. If an old woman with a cane can bully you, what do you think the council will do? They'll tear you apart before dessert is served. The heat in Marlowe's gut intensified, building like steam in a sealed kettle. Her vision tinged red at the edges. I said stop. Her voice came out lower, rougher, and I said make me. Another jab, this one genuinely painful. What are you going to do about it, little null girl, crybag? That's all you know, isn't it? How to... The words cut off as something inside Marlowe snapped. She spun, and the world exploded. A shockwave of crimson energy blasted outward from her body like a detonation. The air itself seemed to crack. The massive antique mirror on the wall shattered into 1,000 glittering diamonds that hung suspended for a heartbeat before raining down. The windows blew outward curtains, whipping in the sudden gale. Medical equipment toppled. The bed skidded several feet across the floor. And Lady Whitmore was lifted clean off her feet and thrown backward, landing on a leather sofa 15 feet away. Silence descended, broken only by the musical tinkling of falling glass. Marlowe stood in the center of the devastation, chest heaving. Her hands were glowing, actually glowing with a faint crimson aura that pulsed in time with her racing heartbeat. She stared at them in shock and terror. What did I just do? The door exploded inward, hinges screaming. Caspian burst through, claws fully extended, eyes shifted from ice blue to molten silver. Elias Thorne was right behind him, along with 2 security guards, all of them ready for combat. Where's the attacker? Caspian snarled, his gaze sweeping the ruined room. Where's the threat? Lady Whitmore slowly sat up on the sofa, brushing glass shards from her tweed jacket. Her hair had come partially loose from its bun. For the first time since arriving, she didn't look condescending or superior. She looked impressed. There is no attacker, Your Majesty, Lady Whitmore said, her voice carrying a note of satisfaction despite the chaos. It appears our little invalid has discovered her temper. And what a temper it is. Caspian's eyes snapped to Marlowe. She stood frozen in place, hands still faintly glowing, surrounded by destruction. Their eyes met, and she saw his expression shift from battle-ready rage to something closer to wonder. Everyone out, he commanded, his voice leaving no room for argument. Elias, clear the hallway. Now. The guards fled immediately. Elias hesitated only a moment before following, though he shot Marlowe a look that was equal parts concerned and curious. The door clicked shut behind them. Caspian crossed the room in 3 strides, his claws retracting, his eyes fading back to their normal winter-pale shade. He reached out slowly, giving her time to pull away, and took her glowing hands in his. Are you hurt? His voice was intense, focused entirely on her. Not on the shattered mirror, the blown-out windows, the destruction she'd caused. Just on her. No, Marlowe whispered. But the room I destroyed, I didn't mean to. I can buy 1,000 rooms. He dismissed the damage with a wave of his hand, as if antique furniture and irreplaceable architecture meant nothing. His thumb stroked across her knuckles, and where he touched, the crimson glow faded. Marlowe, that was Alpha Command, telekinetic force. It's a trait of the Moonscar bloodline. He looked past her to Lady Whitmore, who was now standing and straightening her clothes. You saw nothing. On the contrary, Your Majesty. Lady Whitmore's bow was deep and genuine, nothing mocking about it. I saw a queen coming into her power, and it was magnificent. After Lady Whitmore departed with surprising grace, given that she'd been thrown across a room, Caspian led Marlowe out of the destroyed medical wing. They walked through corridors of obsidian ridge, and Marlowe tried not to gawk at her surroundings. The compound was built into the cliffs overlooking Puget Sound, all dark stone and reclaimed timber. Massive windows offered views of Seattle's skyline in the distance and the Olympic Mountains rising like teeth across the water. It was beautiful in a severe, unforgiving way. Like its owner, they emerged onto a private terrace, and the wind immediately whipped Marlowe's hair across her face. The view was breathtaking. The sound stretched out below them, gray-blue and endless, with ferries cutting white lines across the water. The air smelled of salt and pine and approaching rain. My father built this place to intimidate people, Caspian said, leaning against the stone balustrade. He wanted a fortress that looked like a weapon, something that would make other alphas think twice before challenging him. He turned to look at her, moonlight catching the sharp angles of his face. I hated it growing up. It was cold, empty, more prison than home. Marlowe moved to stand beside him, careful to keep space between them. The mate bond hummed in her chest, urging her closer, but she didn't trust herself. Didn't trust the power that had exploded out of her earlier. I've spent 10 years on this throne, Caspian continued, his voice quiet. 10 years of wolves approaching me because they want something. Power, territory, protection, alliance. He laughed, but there was no humor in it. They fear me or they want to use me. Sometimes both. But none of them, not one, has ever looked at me and just seen a man. He turned to her then, and the intensity in his eyes made her breath catch. When I saw you collapsed on that ballroom floor, when the mate bond snapped into place, it wasn't just biology. It was relief. His voice dropped even lower. For the first time in a decade, I looked at someone who didn't care that I was king. You didn't want my power or my protection. You just wanted help. He reached into his jacket and pulled out a small velvet box. Marlowe's heart stuttered. I can't mark you yet, he said, opening the box. Inside, nestled in black silk, was a ring. Not a traditional diamond. This was a band of white gold set with a raw, unpolished stone that seemed to glow from within, blue-white, like glacier ice pulsing with an inner cold fire. If I bite you, your scent will change. The council will know immediately that I've claimed a mate before their investigation is complete. They'll accelerate their timeline, bring in blood mages, make it impossible to maintain your cover. He took her hand, her left hand, and slid the ring onto her finger. It fit perfectly, and the moment it settled into place, something changed. The buzzing energy that had been crackling under her skin since she woke up, the heat that threatened to explode out of her at any moment, suddenly settled into a warm, manageable hum. Glacier diamond? Caspian explained, his thumb stroking over the stone. Formed in ice caves deep in the Montana mountains over thousands of years. It's said to ground chaotic energy to help wolves control their power when it's new and wild. Marlowe stared at the ring, at the way the stone caught the light, at how her hand looked with it, small and scarred, but somehow right. Wear this, Caspian said softly. It will help you control the outbursts, and it will serve as a warning to anyone who looks at your hand. You're under my protection. You belong to me. He paused, then added with a hint of dark humor, and I to you. Marlowe looked up at him, this man who was supposed to be cold and dead inside, who had killed thousands, who ruled through fear. But here in the moonlight, he just looked tired and lonely and desperately, fiercely protective. Caspian, she said softly, what if they find out what I am? What if I'm not strong enough to fool them? He cupped her face in his hands, tilting her head back. His thumb traced the line of her lower lip, and electricity sparked wherever he touched. Then we fight, he said simply, together. And if we burn, his eyes held hers, glacial and burning with cold fire. If we burn together. Then he leaned down and kissed her. It wasn't gentle. It wasn't chaste. It was hungry and desperate and full of 10 years of emptiness, finally finding something to hold on to. His hands tangled in her hair, and she clutched at his jacket, pulling him closer even though they were already pressed together. The mate bond sang between them, electric and fierce. Marlowe felt something in her chest crack open, something that had been frozen and locked away. It hurt and felt like finally being able to breathe all at once. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Caspian rested his forehead against hers. For you, he whispered, I would burn the world. Remember that. When they come with their questions and their accusations and their laws, remember that I chose you. I will always choose you. Marlowe believed him. Maybe it was the mate bond, or maybe it was the way his hands trembled slightly where they touched her face. But she believed him. And for the first time in 12 years, she didn't feel alone. They stood on the terrace for a long time, wrapped in each other, watching the lights of Seattle flicker to life below them as night fell over the sound. Neither of them spoke. Words felt inadequate for what was building between them, something stronger than attraction, deeper than need. Inside the compound, staff began preparing for the arrival of the council. In 3 days, the lies would begin. The performance. The fight for Marlowe's life disguised as political theater. But here in this moment, there was just a broken king and a broken girl finding something like wholeness in each other. The Winter King and his secret queen stealing borrowed time before the wolves came to tear them apart. The next 4 days passed in a blur of preparation that felt more like preparing for war than a dinner party. Lady Whitmore drilled Marlowe relentlessly on etiquette and history, while Caspian taught her to move like an alpha, how to command a room with just her presence, how to meet challenges with cold authority instead of submission. But it was the quiet moments that mattered most. The nights when Caspian would sit beside her bed, teaching her about pack politics and council machinations. The mornings when she'd find him standing guard outside her door, looking like he hadn't slept. The stolen hours on the terrace where they'd talk about everything except what was coming. On the 4th night, Caspian found her in the library, unable to sleep. She was curled in a leather chair, staring at nothing. Can't stop thinking about tomorrow, she said as he settled into the chair beside hers. The dinner. If Holloway suspects, he already does. Caspian's voice was grim. Holloway lost his entire family in the uprising. His wife was Moonscar. He loved her, and when my father gave the execution order, Holloway carried it out himself to prove his loyalty. He ran a hand through his hair. He spent 20 years hunting for survivors. This is personal for him. Marlowe's hands clenched on the armrests. The glacier diamond ring pulsed with cold light. Caspian turned to her, reaching out to cup her face. I need to tell you something. Before tomorrow, before everything changes. What? His ice blue eyes held hers, intense and vulnerable. I love you. The words hung in the air between them. Marlowe's breath caught. I know it's fast, he continued, his voice rough with emotion. A week ago you were dying on my ballroom floor, but the mate bond doesn't lie. And beyond that, I love how you're brave when you're terrified. How you healed the frostbite curse that's plagued me for 20 years. How you look at servants like they're equals. How you fight back even when the world has spent 12 years crushing you. His voice thickened. The council will try to break us tomorrow. I need you to know, no matter what happens, what they say, what they threaten, I choose you. Over the crown, Over the law, over everything. I choose you. Tears streamed down Marlowe's face. I choose you too. I don't know how to be a queen, but I know how to fight, and I'll fight for us. He kissed her, then tender and desperate all at once. Then he pulled her into his lap, and she curled against his chest, listening to his heartbeat, until dawn broke over Seattle. They would face the council together. The Grand Hall of Obsidian Ridge had been transformed for the occasion. A massive table of reclaimed timber stretched 40 feet set with silver and crystal that caught the firelight. 12 places were set, 6 for the council, 6 for Caspian's inner circle. Marlowe wore a midnight blue gown that covered her from neck to wrist, hiding her scars. The glacier diamond ring felt heavy on her finger. Lady Whitmore had styled her hair in an elegant twist, and for the first time in her life, Marlowe looked like she might actually belong in a room like this. But her hands were shaking. Caspian stood beside her, devastatingly handsome in a charcoal suit. He took her hand, squeezing gently. "Remember," he murmured, "you're Lady Ashwood. Distant relation to Virginia nobility. Your family died in a wildfire 7 years ago. You've been living in Europe since then." "I remember," she whispered back. The doors opened. Counselor Ambrose Holloway entered first, and Marlowe's blood ran cold. He was thin to the point of gaunt, with wire-rimmed spectacles that magnified cold gray eyes. He moved with the careful precision of a predator conserving energy, and he smelled like old leather and dried blood and something else, grief ancient and bitter. Behind him came the other council members, all-powerful alphas who had survived decades of pack politics. But Holloway was clearly the leader, the one who commanded respect through fear and fanaticism. "Your Majesty," Holloway's bow was perfunctory, "thank you for hosting us on such short notice. Though I must say I was intrigued by the reports from the Continental Summit. A mysterious collapse, a dramatic rescue, and now," his magnified eyes fixed on Marlowe, "a mysterious guest." "Counselor Holloway," Caspian's voice was ice and iron, "may I present Lady Ashwood, a distant relation of the Virginia Ashwood line. She's been living abroad and was kind enough to accept my invitation to visit." "How fascinating." Holloway moved closer, circling Marlowe like a shark. "And where exactly in Europe have you been residing, Lady Ashwood?" Marlowe kept her chin up, meeting his gaze. "France primarily, a small estate in Provence." "Provence, lovely region." Holloway's smile didn't reach his eyes. "And which branch of the Ashwood family did you say, the Virginia line?" "Yes, from the southern estates near the Shenandoah Valley." "Curious." Holloway pulled out a leather folder from his jacket. "I took the liberty of reviewing the Ashwood genealogy this morning. The Virginia line died out 7 years ago in a rather tragic wildfire. The property was seized by creditors. No survivors were recorded." The room went silent. Marlowe felt every eye on her. Caspian's hand found hers under the table, squeezing. "Records from rural areas are often incomplete, Counselor, especially in cases of natural disaster." "True, true." Holloway set down the folder, his magnified eyes never leaving Marlowe. "But I'm thorough, Your Majesty, which is why I brought someone who might help clarify matters." He snapped his fingers. The doors opened again, and 2 guards escorted in a young man in an ill-fitting suit. Marlowe's heart stopped. "Colton Blackwell." "This is Colton Blackwell," Holloway announced, "son of Alpha Thaddeus Blackwell. He's come forward with an interesting story about a servant girl who went missing from his pack the same night you found your mysterious guest." Colton walked forward, his eyes finding Marlowe. She saw fear in them, fear of Caspian, fear of the council, but also greed. They'd promised him something substantial for this testimony. "Colton," Holloway said pleasantly, "look carefully at Lady Ashwood. Is this the servant girl from your pack, the null called Marlowe Thorne?" Caspian rose slowly from his chair. The temperature in the room dropped 10 degrees. "Choose your next words very carefully, boy. You're speaking about my honored guest." Colton swallowed, hard sweat beading on his forehead. He looked at Caspian, then Holloway, then back to Marlowe. And Marlowe stared back. She didn't plead, didn't beg. She remembered Lady Whitmore's lessons. She remembered the power that had exploded from her hands. She remembered that she was more than what they'd made her. She was a queen. She just had to wake up. She channeled alpha energy, focusing it into a silent command that pressed against Colton's mind. "Lie." Colton hesitated. He sniffed the air, his wolf instincts taking over. The glacier diamond ring and Dr. Crane's treatments had fundamentally altered Marlowe's scent. She no longer smelled like industrial soap and fear. She smelled like rain after a lightning storm and wild lavender the scent of power barely contained. Colton's frown deepened. "She looked similar. But the girl from our pack, Marlowe, she was a null. She smelled like nothing, weak, pathetic." He pointed a shaking finger at Marlowe. This woman smells like an alpha, strong, stronger than my father. His voice cracked. It can't be the same person. Holloway's face twisted with fury. Are you certain? Look again. I don't need to look again. Colton was backing toward the door now, his wolf clearly terrified of being caught between a vengeful king and a bloodthirsty counselor. Scent doesn't lie. The Knoll girl smelled like dishwater. This woman smells like a storm. Enough, Caspian commanded. You've insulted my guest sufficiently. Guards escort him out before I forget my hospitality. Colton fled, relief written across his face. The guards followed, closing the doors behind them, but Marlowe knew the reprieve was temporary. Holloway's eyes glittered with cold calculation. He'd lost this round, but he wasn't finished. My apologies, Lady Ashwood, Holloway said, settling back into his chair. You understand, we must be thorough, especially given the rather dramatic circumstances of your introduction to the king. Of course, Marlowe forced her voice steady. Though I find such interrogation rather tedious. Holloway's smile was sharp as broken glass. Then perhaps we can settle the matter more definitively. He reached into his jacket and withdrew a small glass vial containing dark viscous liquid. He placed it on the table with deliberate care. What is that? Caspian's voice was dangerously soft. Wolf's Bane extract, highly refined. Holloway poured a single drop into his own wine glass, then gestured for a server to do the same to Marlowe's. An old tradition among high nobility. We ingest a microdose to prove the purity of our bloodlines. A Knoll would die instantly. A common wolf would become violently ill. But a true alpha, a wolf of noble breeding, can withstand it without effect. His magnified eyes fixed on Marlowe. Drink, Lady Ashwood. Unless, of course, you have reason to decline. It was a perfect trap. Refuse and admit she was lying. Drink and die if she was actually a Knoll. Drink and get sick if she was a common wolf. But she wasn't common. She was Moonscar. And Moonscar wolves were immune to poisons. It was one of the traits that had made them so dangerous, so hunted. Caspian moved to knock the glass from her hand, panic flashing across his face. He didn't know about the immunity. He thought he was about to watch her die. No, Marlowe's hand covered his, stopping him. She looked into his ice-blue eyes, trying to communicate without words. Trust me. She stood, picking up the wine glass. The dark liquid swirled inside, and she could smell the poison even through the wine, bitter and caustic. To the king, she said clearly, and drank it in one smooth swallow. The room held its breath. The poison hit her stomach like swallowed fire. Her throat constricted. Nausea rolled through her in waves. For a terrible moment, she thought she'd miscalculated that Dr. Crane had been wrong. Then the fire in her blood, the Moonscar heritage that had been locked away for 22 years, rose to meet the poison. Where they collided, the burning sensation simply stopped, transformed into a cool tingling sensation that spread through her veins. Marlowe set the empty glass down on the table with the firm click. She didn't vomit, didn't collapse, didn't even cough. She smiled at Holloway, whose jaw had actually dropped. Delicious, though a bit dry for my taste. Do you have anything from the Willamette Valley? I find Oregon wines more palatable. The silence was absolute. Holloway stared at her with a mixture of horror and dawning realization. He knew. In that moment, he knew exactly what she was. Only a Moonscar wolf could swallow pure wolf's bane and smile. Impossible, he whispered. Is the interrogation over, Counselor? Marlowe asked, her voice cold and cutting. I find this dinner tedious. Caspian was staring at her like she'd grown wings, but he recovered quickly. He stood, his aura filling the room with suffocating dominance. You heard the lady. This dinner is concluded. All of you out, now. The other council members fled immediately, sensing the king's barely leashed violence. But Holloway stood slowly, gathering his papers with deliberate care. He looked at Marlowe one last time. This isn't over, Your Majesty, he said quietly. The council does not suffer abominations to live, and I will prove what she is. He turned and walked out, his footsteps echoing in the vast hall. When the door closed, Caspian collapsed into his chair, exhaling shakily. How? He asked, pulling her into his lap. That was enough wolf's bane to kill an elephant. Marlowe buried her face in his neck, breathing in his scent pine and frost in safety. I don't know. I just knew I could survive it. Felt it in my blood. Caspian held her tighter, and she could feel him trembling. They know, he whispered against her hair. Holloway knows what you are. He won't arrest you now, he needs public proof. But he will come for you, Marlowe. He'll declare war. Let him come. Marlowe pulled back, meeting his eyes. The fear that had defined her for 12 years was gone, burned away by Wolf's bane and mate bonds, and the realization that she was done hiding. I'm tired of being afraid. If they want a monster, I'll show them exactly what a Moonscar wolf can do. 3 days of tense peace followed. Then at midnight on the third day, the attack came. Marlowe woke to alarms shrieking through Obsidian Ridge. An explosion shook the compound, and she could hear the sounds of battle snarls, gunfire, the unnatural crack of combat magic. She ran to the window. Below in the courtyard, she could see figures in black tactical gear pouring through a breach in the eastern wall. The insignia on their armor, a white wolf's head with red eyes. The Pure Blood Coalition, Holloway's private militia. And through the mate bond, she felt Caspian's rage burning like a forest fire, then felt it flicker, go cold. Pain exploded in her side, mirrored from him. He'd been shot with silver. Marlowe didn't think. She just ran. The compound was a war zone. Bodies littered the hallways, some in security uniforms, some in black tactical gear. Marlowe vaulted over them, following the bond, following the scent of pine and frost and copper blood. She burst into the courtyard and froze. Caspian was on his knees in the center, surrounded by 6 soldiers with glowing silver spears. Blood soaked his shirt from a dozen wounds. His healing factor was failing, overwhelmed by silver poisoning, and standing above him, holding an ornate silver pistol, was Counselor Holloway. "Ah, there she is." Holloway smiled. "Perfect timing. I wanted you to watch this." He aimed the pistol at Caspian's head. "The king is dead. Long live the council." "No." The word tore from Marlowe's throat, and with it came something else. Something that had been locked away for 22 years, clawing to get free. Holloway pulled the trigger. The bullet never reached Caspian. Because between one heartbeat and the next, Marlowe exploded. Her bones snapped and reformed with sounds like rifle shots. Her skin split, black fur erupting through. Most werewolves stopped growing at 5 feet at the shoulder. Marlowe kept growing, 6 feet, 7, 8, 9. When the transformation settled, a monster stood in the courtyard. A dire wolf, creature of legend, nightmare-made flesh. Her fur was pitch black with silver-tipped edges that glinted like frost. Her eyes burned violet red like dying embers. She was the size of a delivery truck, with claws 12 inches long and fangs like daggers. The courtyard went silent with absolute terror. "Dire wolf," one soldier whispered. "Demon." Marlowe Beast didn't roar. She opened her jaws and released a sound that was less noise and more vibration. It shook the ground, cracked windows, made the soldiers' ears bleed. Then she moved. She was impossibly fast for something so massive. 2 soldiers died before they could scream, swatted into walls with bone-shattering force. A third she bit cleanly in half. The remaining soldiers thrust their silver spears. The weapons shattered against her hide like glass. Her fur was armor. She advanced on Holloway, who had backed against a fountain, his pistol forgotten on the ground. "You can't. I'm a counselor. I have the law." The dire wolf lowered her massive head until they were eye to eye. Her breath smelled like sulfur in winter storms. "Marlowe," Caspian's voice weak but commanding. "Stop. Don't kill him. Not like this." The wolf froze, looked at Holloway, sobbing in terror, then back at Caspian. "If you kill him now, you prove them right," Caspian said, dragging himself upright against a pillar. "Show them what you really are. Show them you're a queen." The violet red fire in the wolf's eyes dimmed slightly. She snorted a blast of air that knocked Holloway's spectacles off. But she didn't kill him. Instead, she sat back on her haunches, guarding Caspian with her massive body. She threw her head back and howled. The sound echoed across Seattle, across the mountains, across the Pacific Northwest. A declaration that a new power had risen, the most powerful alpha on Earth. 2 days later, Holloway invoked the law of ancient trial from his cell, the right of single combat, to prove Marlowe's right to exist. Refuse and Caspian would be executed. Lose and she would die. Win and she would become High Queen, untouchable by law. They held the trial at Lumen Field Arena in Seattle. 15,000 wolves filled the stands. Holloway's champion was the Wendigo, a wolf infected with an ancient curse, 10 feet of emaciated muscle and madness that felt no pain and knew only killing. The fight was brutal. The Wendigo managed to tear into Marlowe's shoulder to claw at her eyes. But in the end, she was dire wolf, and it was merely cursed. She caught its throat in her massive jaws and crushed windpipe and spine in one terrible moment. When she shifted back to human form, naked and blood-covered in the center of the arena, Caspian was there instantly. He vaulted the wall, sprinting to her, throwing his royal cloak over her shoulders. "I did it," she whispered as her legs gave out. He caught her, holding her upright. Then he turned to face the crowd, his voice amplified by alpha power until it reached every ear in the stadium. Behold, she has fought. She has bled. By ancient law, she is innocent. This is not a witch, not a monster. This is Moonscar, the guardian lineage returned. And then Caspian Ashford, the Winter King, dropped to one knee in the blood-soaked sand. I, Caspian Ashford, king of all wolves, bow to her. His ice-blue eyes blazed as he looked at the crowd. And so will you. One by one they rose and bowed, commoners first, then nobles. Finally, the terrified High Council. The roar was deafening. Long live the Queen. 6 months later, Marlowe sat on the terrace at Obsidian Ridge, reading reports on the new legislation that would reshape the North American Pax for generations to come. The Moonscar ban had been lifted after 2 centuries of genocide disguised as justice. Suppressed wolves across the continent were being tested for blood seals already. They'd found 17 others. 17 more ghosts being given their voices back. 17 more wolves learning they'd never been broken, just bound. Below in the courtyard, construction crews were putting finishing touches on the new training center, a place where suppressed alphas could learn to control their power without fear of execution, where nulls could discover they'd never been null at all, just sealed by someone who thought they were protecting them or imprisoning them. The distinction Marlowe had learned often came down to love or fear. The Blackwell Pact had been dissolved by council decree. Alpha Thaddeus and his daughter Seraphine faced trial for 12 years of enslavement, systematic torture, and attempted murder. The evidence was damning. Marlowe's scars, Dr. Crane's medical reports, testimony from other servants who'd finally found the courage to speak. They'd been sentenced to life imprisonment in the Northern Territories, working the mines alongside the rogues they'd once threatened to sell her to. A mercy Marlowe hadn't wanted to give, but Caspian had insisted. Let them live with what they did, he'd said, his hand gentle on her scarred back. Let them work until their bones ache and their hands bleed. Let them feel what you felt every day for the rest of their miserable lives. Death would be too kind. She'd agreed. Some fates were worse than execution. Colton Blackwell had testified against his father in exchange for exile instead of imprisonment. Stripped of his pack, his name, his inheritance, sent to the Canadian territories to work as a common laborer. Last she'd heard, he was mucking out stables and sleeping in a bunkhouse with 20 other exiles. Learning finally what it meant to be powerless, what it meant to be invisible. She hoped it taught him something. But she didn't think about him much anymore. Counselor Ambrose Holloway had been executed 2 days after the trial. Not for attacking the king, that would have been merely treason, but for murdering his own Moonscar wife 20 years ago, then hunting and killing 43 other Moonscar wolves he'd helped hide during the uprising. Evidence Elias had uncovered while investigating the attack on Obsidian Ridge. Holloway had loved a Moonscar woman, had married her in secret, had 3 children with her. Then when the uprising began and his king demanded loyalty, he'd killed her himself to prove he was faithful to the crown. Killed his children too. Then spent 20 years hunting down every other Moonscar he'd once protected, trying to erase the evidence of his betrayal, trying to drown his guilt in their blood. It hadn't worked. Guilt didn't wash away, it just festered. The irony wasn't lost on anyone. The man who'd called her an abomination had loved one of her kind enough to die for her, and then killed her anyway. You're thinking too hard. Caspian's voice broke through her dark thoughts. I can feel it through the bond. Your mind is going to those places again. He appeared on the terrace with 2 glasses of wine, looking nothing like the cold Winter King who'd walked into that ballroom 6 months ago. He smiled now, laughed. The darkness that had haunted him for 20 years, the frostbite curse, the screaming wolf, the weight of his father's genocide was gone. Burned away by mate bonds and healing touch, and finally having something worth protecting instead of just territory worth defending. He pulled her onto his lap with easy familiarity, and she went willingly, curling into his warmth like she'd been made to fit there. Maybe she had been. The mate bond was still a mystery to her, this invisible thread that tied her soul to his, that let her feel his emotions like echoes of her own, that made his pain her pain and his joy her joy. But she wouldn't trade it for anything. He kissed the mating mark on her neck, the bite he'd given her the night after the trial right here on this terrace, under a full moon that had witnessed their vows. The mark was a raised scar, now silver against her skin, shaped like a wolf's fangs. Beautiful in its own way. A permanent claim that said she belonged to someone, that someone belonged to her. You changed the world, he murmured against her skin, his lips tracing the mark. Marlowe looked at the glacier diamond ring still on her hand. She'd refused to take it off even after the mating bite. Then out at the sunset painting Puget Sound in shades of gold and crimson. In the distance, Seattle's lights were beginning to flicker on, and somewhere out there, 17 wolves were waking up from the same nightmare she'd lived. Somewhere out there, gnolls were discovering they had voices. Servants were learning they had power. Ghosts were becoming real. "I didn't change it," she said softly. "I just stopped hiding from it. Stopped letting them make me small." Caspian's arms tightened around her. "You became exactly what they feared most. A moonscar who refused to die, who refused to disappear." He pressed a kiss to her temple. "My father spent 3 months trying to exterminate your bloodline. You brought it back in a single night." "We brought it back," she corrected, turning to look at him. "You're the one who knelt in that arena. You're the one who made them bow. You could have let Holloway execute me. Could have chosen your crown over." "Don't." His hand cupped her face thumb, stroking her cheek. "Don't ever think I would choose anything over you. The crown is metal and politics. You're real. You're mine. There was never a choice." She kissed him then, soft and slow, tasting wine and love, and the future they were building together. When they broke apart, both slightly breathless, he was smiling that crooked smile that never failed to make her heart stutter. "I'm still the luckiest man alive," he said, "even though you never let me win arguments." "Careful, Your Majesty." She nipped at his jaw, letting her teeth scrape skin. "Or I'll bite." "I'm counting on it." His laugh rumbled through his chest into hers, warm and alive and free. Under the rising moon, full and bright and beautiful, the Winter King and his dire wolf queen sat wrapped in each other, watching the world they'd fought for settle into peace. Not the peace of silence or submission, but the peace of justice finally served, of ghosts finally seen, of monsters finally understood. Tomorrow there would be more work, more sealed wolves to find, more laws to change, more battles to fight. But tonight there was just this, a broken king and a girl who'd learned she'd never been broken, finding wholeness in each other. And they would defend it, this peace, this world, this love against anyone who tried to take it away. Together, always together.